The ash storm had a way of getting into everything. It slipped under armored collars, into weapon seams, behind the eyes of cracked drones still twitching in the dirt. It hissed across the blackened stones of Orthia like the whole planet was whispering after the battle, passing judgment in 1,000 dry little voices. Captain Ilya's then hated planets that whispered. "Wonderful," he muttered, kicking at the leg of a half-buried reconnaissance unit. "I survive orbital fire, 2 ambushes, and 1 extremely insulting tactical briefing just to be murdered by dust." His suit's medical system chimed softly. "Hydration warning." "I know," he told it. "You always bring up water like you're my mother." The system chimed again, this time with the cold little tone it used when it believed it was dealing with an idiot. Across the shattered basin, pale light pulsed through the wreckage of a collapsed energy spire. The battle had burned itself out less than an hour ago, but the plane still held the heat of it. Melted alloy steamed in the cracks. Drone husks lay upside down like dead insects. Somewhere far off, an automated cannon fired one lonely shot into an enemy that had probably already been dead for 20 minutes. Ilyas adjusted the rifle across his back and stepped over a fallen beam. He had been separated from the rest of his unit during the retreat, which sounded dramatic until one admitted the truth. He had taken a wrong turn trying to avoid a crater and ended up walking into history by accident. "Command," he said into his comm. Static answered him. "Excellent. Good talk." He climbed a ridge of debris and looked down into the shadow of the broken spire. Someone moved below. He froze. Not a drone, not one of his own, too graceful. The figure was pinned beneath a slab of crystalline conductor, one arm trapped, one leg twisted under her. A flickering shield thread sparked across the rubble over her torso, failing and reforming in weak bursts. Alien armor, dark and close-fitted, marked with silver lines that glowed faintly at the throat and wrists. Her face was turned away. Then she lifted her head. For a second in the stormlight she looked human enough to make his stomach drop. Same eyes, same mouth, same shock of dark hair plastered against her temple with sweat and grit. Then he saw the ears, long, elegant, curving back from the sides of her head in fine tapering arcs, trembling at the tips as if listening to something buried inside the storm itself. She saw him seeing them. Neither of them moved. His rifle stayed on his back. Her hand stayed near the sidearm at her hip, though she clearly could not reach it fast enough to matter. The translator in his collar picked up a faint pulse from her armor. Language handshake initiated. "Human," she said. Her voice came through his implant a half-second late, flattened by machine interpretation but still carrying something proud and dangerous underneath. "Alien," he answered. She stared at him. He sighed. "Sorry, long day." Her gaze sharpened, as if she had not expected humor from a battlefield scavenger. The conductor slab gave a hot crackle and settled another inch. Pain flashed across her face before she crushed it back into stillness. Ilyas crouched carefully on the slope above her. "Can you move anything?" "My left hand. That's a tragic amount of progress." She blinked once. "You make jokes near the dead. I make jokes near everything. It prevents me from becoming unbearable." Another pause. Then very slightly one ear twitched. That was either alien outrage or the beginning of a laugh. Hard to tell. He scanned the slab with his wrist display. Unstable, residual energy. One bad shift and the entire section could discharge hard enough to cook them both inside their bones. "Right," he murmured. "Of course it's electrified. Why would anything in my life ever be simple?" "You should go," she said. "The core may burst." "Probably," he said. "You will die." "Yes, but I might die feeling smug, and that has to count for something." He slid down the rubble a little closer, boots digging for purchase. Up close, her armor was more intricate than he had first thought, built from layered plates that flexed like skin. There were fractures along the breast and shoulder where shrapnel had struck. Blood dark, almost silver in the stormlight, ran from beneath one seam and soaked into the ash. She watched his hands. "You know our kind," she said. "No, you do not fear me." "I'm afraid of many things," he said. "Tax forms." automatic doors that open too slowly, military coffee. But right now I'm mostly afraid of that conductor deciding to turn both of us into educational vapor. The translator must have stumbled over educational vapor because she frowned as if trying to imagine a school lesson involving explosions. He reached toward the slab, her voice sharpened. "Stop." He stopped. "If you lift wrongly," she said, "the charge will arc through me. And if I do nothing, you stay here and become part of local geology. That is preferable to granting the enemy amusement." He looked at her for a beat. "You are very committed to dignity for someone trapped under a glowing rock." At that, unmistakably, the tip of one ear jerked. "Definitely amusement." "Fine," he said. "You tell me how your armor routes energy, and I'll try not to accidentally murder you." She hesitated. Her people and his had not exactly spent the last decade exchanging recipes and warm holiday wishes. Trust on Orthia was usually a short trip followed by a funeral. But the slab shifted again, and pain made the choice for her. She spoke quickly, her language flowing through the translator in clipped bursts. The silver lines at the throat and ribs, they redirect overload, strike the left channel and sever it, then lift from the higher edge only. Do not touch the central spine. Why? It will explode. See, that feels like something you should have led with. He drew the compact cutting tool from his belt and adjusted its field. The storm hissed. Far overhead, something huge moved through the clouds with the low metallic groan of damaged ships trying to leave orbit. He leaned in, her eyes fixed on his face. "You trust me very suddenly," he said. "I do not." Comforting. "I have merely chosen the risk with the better odds." He grinned despite himself. "That may be the nicest thing anyone said to me all month." The cutting beam kissed the silver line at her throat, sparks spit. Her body jerked, but she did not cry out. The channel went dark. "One," he said, "still alive?" "Yes." "You sound disappointed." "Proceed, human." He severed the second line near her ribs. The shield thread over her armor flickered violently and died. For one awful second the slab hummed brighter, and his suit screamed proximity alerts in both ears. Then the charge bled away into the ash. "Now," she said through clenched teeth. He planted both hands under the upper edge of the conductor slab and lifted. It did not move. "Ah," he said, "I see. It's one of those situations where determination is expected to replace mass." She actually made a sound then, short, breathless, almost a laugh despite the pain. He reset his stance and drove power from his suit into the arm servos. Motors whined, the slab rose a fraction. "Tell me," he grunted, "does your species have a tradition for honoring idiots?" "We have many." "Good, I like options." The slab lifted high enough. "Move," he snapped. She pulled free with startling speed, rolling through ash and sparks just as the conductor tore from his grip and crashed down hard enough to split the stone beneath it. A blast of heat threw him sideways. His visor flashed white. For a moment he heard nothing. Then the storm came back, and the hiss, and his own breathing. He pushed himself up onto one elbow. She was kneeling 3 meters away, one hand braced on the ground, the other pressed against her wounded side. Her long ears were flattened back tight against her hair. She stared at him as if he had stepped out of myth or concussion. "You're welcome," he said hoarsely. "I would stand, but the ground and I are having an emotional conversation." She rose slowly. The basin had gone strangely still. At the ridge above them, 3 figures in armor of her people had appeared through the dust, weapons lowered but ready, witnesses. The woman looked at them, then at Ilya's. Something changed in her face, not softness exactly, but decision. She stepped toward him. Ilya's pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. "All right," he said. "Before this becomes a cultural misunderstanding, I should mention I'm very bad at ceremonies." She stopped an arm's length away. Her expression was solemn. Her voice, when it came, was clear enough that even without the translator he would have understood its weight. "You saved my life," she said. "Before witness and sky, I am yours now." The wind moved between them. Behind her, the 3 armored figures bowed their heads. Ilya stared. His suit helpfully recorded elevated heart rate, probable shock, and moderate dehydration, as if dehydration might explain any part of this. The translator replayed the sentence in his ear, perhaps believing he had not understood it the first time. The alien woman held his gaze, waiting. Ilyas opened his mouth, closed it. Then he looked at the solemn witnesses, the burning wreckage, the whispering ash, and finally back at her face. "I need," he said carefully, "about 10 full seconds before I respond to that, because where I come from, those words are either extremely illegal or the start of a catastrophic marriage." The three witnesses did not laugh. That, more than anything, told Ilyas the situation had escaped the comfortable boundaries of absurdity and entered the much more dangerous territory of sincerity. The alien woman stood before him without wavering, one hand still pressed to the torn seam of her armor, silver-dark blood drying against her side, as if dignity alone were acting as a medical sealant. Her long ears, which he had already begun to suspect were the least subtle emotional indicators in the known galaxy, were angled back in a posture he could not read yet. Tension, perhaps. Resolve. Or possibly the alien equivalent of "please do not make this worse." Naturally, he made it worse. "I'm flattered," he said, raising both hands carefully. "Truly. But I should warn you, I am difficult to own, emotionally unreliable before breakfast, and banned from operating heavy excavation vehicles on 2 moons. The translator rendered this into her language with smooth, ceremonial precision. One of the witnesses made a strangled sound. The woman's eyes narrowed. "You believe I joke?" "No," said Ilyas. "I joke because I believe." "Those are not the same." "Usually not, no." Ash skated over the stones between them. Far above, something in low orbit gave a groan like a god turning over in bed. The basin still smelled of melted alloy and ion discharge. Around them, pieces of the battle quietly finished dying. The woman touched 2 fingers to her chest, then inclined her head. "I am Sheelan of the Telari 9th line." Ilyas Ven. Human, occasional professional embarrassment. The translator paused briefly on embarrassment, then chose a word that, judging by the witness's expressions, probably meant publicly self-wounded fool. Ilyas winced. Close enough. Sheelan studied him with a kind of disciplined disbelief. "Do you reject the bond?" The question had weight in it, not accusation, not yet, but the air around it seemed to tighten all the same. He answered slowly. "I don't reject saving you. I don't reject, whatever this means to you. I just don't like the word own." One of the witnesses stepped forward, taller than Sheelan, face hidden behind a segmented helm, rifle held across his chest. "The right is older than your star maps, human." Ilyas turned his head. "That doesn't automatically make it a good idea. Mold is older than my star maps too." The witness froze. Sheelan's ears gave a sharp twitch. There it was again, that near laugh trying very hard to survive inside a battlefield. "You stand inside sacred custom," the witness said coldly. "And I'm trying not to step on it," Ilyas replied. "But where I come from, if someone says another person belongs to them, everybody gets extremely alarmed and at least one lawyer wakes up screaming." "Lawyer?" asked Sheelan. "A kind of sanctioned predator." That one, incredibly, got a reaction from all 3 witnesses. Tiny, reluctant shifts. Confusion loosening the solemnity by a fraction. Sheelan looked from him to them and back again. "The right does not mean you have captured me." "Good. Because I'm fresh out of cages. It means my life enters your keeping. My strength, my blade, my future labor, my protection. You carry authority and I carry loyalty." He rubbed ash from his brow and immediately regretted it when his glove smeared dirt across his visor. "That sounds poetic, but it also sounds like you had no vote in it." Her expression changed almost invisibly. "My vote was to live." There it was, not ritual, not abstraction, the hard center. He let silence sit for a moment. Then he glanced at the witness on the left and said, "Any of you happen to have a medkit, or are we all committed to having this conversation while she leaks nobly?" The left witness hesitated, then produced a compact field capsule and tossed it down. Ilias caught it with one hand. "Thank you," he said. The witness stared as if gratitude from an enemy had violated some procedural expectation. Ilias crouched and held the capsule out toward Sheelin. "May I?" She looked at the medkit, then at him, then gave the smallest nod. He knelt in the ash and triggered the seal. The capsule unfolded into a membrane injector and a band of pale synthetic mesh. Up close, the damage to her armor was worse than he'd thought. Shrapnel had punched through the side seam and scored the tissue beneath. Not immediately fatal, but close enough to make heroics look stupid. "Hold still," he said. "I am still. You are Telari still. Human still is a different religion." He pressed the injector to the wound. The mesh dissolved through the armor seam, tightening across the torn flesh beneath. Sheelin inhaled sharply but did not move away. The witness on the right said, "Why assist further? The bond is declared. Your claim is secure." Ilias looked up. "My what? Your claim?" "No, absolutely not. I need everyone to stop saying things that make me sound like I won a person in a card game." The translator delivered it perfectly. For one impossible second, even the grim witness at center seemed uncertain whether to be offended. Sheelin lowered her gaze to him. "You speak as if freedom is the only honorable state." He sealed the mesh and sat back on his heels. "No. I speak as if choice is." She considered that. "Duty without choice still has honor." "Maybe," he said, "but I don't think honor should be allergic to consent." The wind moved again, carrying distant signals across the plain. His comm sparked alive with a burst of broken audio. "Then respond." Ilias slapped the receiver at his collar. "Still alive." Static. Then his lieutenant's voice, faint and furious. "You vanished for 43 minutes. Technically, I was misplaced. We have a shuttle window in 12. Where are you?" He looked around the ruined basin, the Telari witnesses, Sheelin standing over him like a half-healed oaf with long ears and a sidearm. "In a delicate diplomatic emergency." A pause. "What did you do?" "That is an unfairly accusatory question. What did you do?" "I may have accidentally become part of a religious tradition." Silence. "Then, I'm leaving you there." The comm died. Ilias exhaled. "That feels premature." One of the witnesses said, "Your people abandon you easily." "Oh no, they treasure me." That was affection. Sheelin's ears angled forward now, curious. "Your comrades speak to you with insult." "Constantly. It builds character." "Or resentment." "Both. We're very efficient." She was looking at him differently now, not as one looks at a rescuer or an enemy, but as one studies a machine built on unfamiliar principles. He suspected that expression would become dangerous later. The center witness stepped down into the basin. "This cannot remain undefined. A witnessed vow must be answered, except and the record is made." "And if I do?" The witness's gaze shifted briefly to Sheelin. "Then the right breaks before witnesses." Something in the wording chilled the air. Ilias rose slowly. "And what happens to her?" Sheelin answered before the witness could. "A broken right stains the save, not the saver." He looked at her, meaning. "My judgment would fail." The ash suddenly seemed too quiet. He heard, not in her voice but behind it, the machinery of an old civilization. Debt, honor, expectation, punishment polished smooth by centuries until cruelty could pass for order. "You almost died," he said, "and if I answer wrong you suffer for it." "It is not suffering. It is consequence." "That is a very suspicious sentence." The witness stiffened. "Take care, human." "No," Ilias snapped, more sharply than he intended. "You take care. She is standing here half bleeding after surviving a battlefield, and you're all worried about ceremony phrasing." Sheelin's ears went still. The witnesses said nothing. He dragged a hand through his hair. "Sorry, that came out louder than planned." "Yet accurately," Sheelin said. He met her eyes. There was no softness in her face, but there was something far more unsettling, a tension without armor. "I cannot answer your right the way you expect," he said quietly. "Not because I dishonor your people. Because where I come from, nobody should be turned into payment for survival." Her throat moved once. "Then give it another meaning." The word struck him harder than the explosion had. The witness at center said immediately, "That is not permitted." Sheelan did not look away from Ilya's. Ancient words survive because they are spoken. Meaning survives because it is chosen. The witness turned toward her. "Sheelan," she silenced him with a glance so sharp it might have qualified as edged weaponry. "Interesting," Ilya's thought. "Very interesting. Also possibly fatal." He said, "You're asking me to improvise inside sacred law on a battlefield." "Yes, that feels deeply irresponsible. Yes, that is, unfortunately, one of my core skills." One ear twitched, there. Definitely amusement this time. He took a breath. The storm hissed over the shattered basin. Orbit groaned. Somewhere behind the clouds, fleets that had spent months trying to kill one another were probably already drafting noble statements about sacrifice and stability. Ilyas looked at the witnesses, then at Sheelan. "I won't say you are mine," he said. "I won't accept any bond that makes you less yourself. But I will say this. I saw your life in danger and I chose to keep it in the universe. If that creates a bond, then let it be one of choice, not ownership, not command." The translator carried the words into the ash. No one moved. Then the witness on the left whispered, almost involuntarily, "There is no form for that." Ilyas nodded. "Yes, I've been a paperwork problem since birth." Sheelan was utterly still. Her eyes did not leave his face. "And if I choose this bond?" she asked. "Then it's yours too," he said, "equally, freely. You can walk away from me tomorrow, and I'll still be glad I pulled that glowing death rock off you." The center witness looked scandalized enough to become a religion. Sheelan, however, looked as if something deep in her had shifted one careful inch. Not broken, moved. At last she said, "You speak like a man with no instinct for power." Ilyas considered that. "I have instinct for power, I just don't trust anyone who enjoys it too much, especially myself." Then, because the universe could never allow a sacred moment to survive unmocked, his suit chose that instant to chirp, hydration critical. He closed his eyes. "Please," he muttered to the heavens, "not now." Sheelan frowned. "Are you under attack?" "In a sense." The suit chimed again. He thumped his chest plate. "I heard you." One of the witnesses asked, baffled, "Why does your armor insult you?" "It's a human design feature." For the first time, Sheelan laughed. It was brief, surprised out of her, almost disbelieving. But it was real. It changed her face. Even the storm seemed to pause around it. Then she drew herself upright and touched her fingers to her chest once more. "Then I choose," she said. The witnesses stared at her in open shock. She continued, each word steady. "Let the record show that the life debt remains, but not as possession. Let it stand as chosen loyalty until either side breaks it by will." The center witness said, horrified, "There is no precedent." Sheelan's long ears angled high, proud and dangerous now. "Then today is expensive." Ilyas could not help it. He laughed, tired and startled and more impressed than was strategically wise. The comm crackled again. "Then, shuttle in 7 minutes, move." He looked at Sheelan. "I need to get to extraction." She looked back at him. "Then I will come." He blinked. "That feels like the start of 12 new problems." "Yes," she said, "but they will be chosen ones." And despite the dying battlefield, despite the witnesses, despite the storm and the groaning wreck of a sky, Ilyas found himself smiling. "Well," he said, "that is unfortunately the kind I usually end up with." The shuttle pilot took one look at Sheelan boarding behind Ilyas and said, with the grave calm of a man confronting his own replacement, "No." "It's good to see you too, Bren," said Ilyas, hauling himself into the troop bay. Bren jabbed a finger toward Sheelan. "That is armed." "So are you." "I'm licensed." Sheelan stepped into the shuttle with smooth dignity, one hand resting near the hilt of her sidearm. Long ears angled slightly forward, as if she were listening for structural weakness in both the ship and the pilot. "If it eases your distress," she said, "I'm not here to seize control." Bren stared. That is exactly what someone here to seize control would say. Ilyas dropped into a crash seat and began fumbling with the harness. "Relax, she's with me." That sentence has never improved a situation. The shuttle lifted hard enough to rattle everyone's teeth. Orthia dropped away beneath them in a blur of black ash, fractured towers, and heat blooms. Anti-air fire still clawed upward from the horizon, but weakly now, like old hatred too tired to stay dramatic. The rear ramp sealed with a hydraulic slam. Bren kept looking back through the cockpit hatch as if he expected Sheelan to unfold into a war machine. She sat across from Ilya's, posture perfect despite the patched wound under her armor. The shuttle's interior lights turned the silver lines in her suit dim blue. She had accepted a seat restraint only after watching Ilya's fight his own for 15 full seconds and lose. "It's caught on your sidearm," she said. "I know that now. You were pulling the wrong strap. I also know that now." She reached across, unhooked the twisted restraint, and snapped it into place with humiliating efficiency. Bren made a low noise from the cockpit. "Excellent, she's already domesticated him." Ilyas leaned his head back against the bulkhead. "I'm surrounded by professionals." Sheelan regarded him. "On my world, admitting weakness before witnesses is considered a tactical error. On mine, it's called teamwork. That seems medically untrue." He grinned. "You'll fit in faster than I expected." The shuttle punched through the upper cloud layer and emerged beneath the broken silhouettes of ships hanging in low orbit. Wreckage turned slowly in the dark. Emergency beacons flashed between drifting hull plates and dead drones. A carrier with its spine split open was venting atmosphere in a silver plume broad enough to catch the local sun. Sheelan looked out through the narrow port. "Your fleet survived better than ours." "That depends who writes the report," said Ilyas. "Military history is mostly organized lying. You say that freely for a soldier. I'm not a soldier." Bren barked a laugh. "He says this every time someone starts shooting at him." Ilyas lifted a finger. "Important distinction. I wear a uniform because someone made a paperwork error 11 years ago." 3 separate times, Bren said. "That is called institutional commitment." Sheelan's eyes shifted between them, measuring this strange human habit of insulting one another with obvious affection. Her ears gave small, almost thoughtful motions. When the shuttle docked with the reluctant comet, the ship greeted them with a flicker in the corridor lights, a hiss from an overworked seal, and the distant crash of something expensive falling over. Ilyas closed his eyes briefly. "Home," he said. Sheelan stepped through the hatch and stopped. The corridor was narrow, crowded with exposed conduit, patched panels, and old diagnostic stickers from at least 6 different manufacturers who would all probably deny ever building anything so disreputable. A maintenance drone rolled past with one manipulator arm missing and a handwritten note taped to its shell, not cursed. "Ignore the NOISES." Sheelan read the note. "The noises are not ignorable." From somewhere in the ceiling came an immediate metallic shriek. Ilyas pointed upward. "That's just Deck 3 negotiating. This vessel is alive, only in the legal sense." Bren shouldered past them. "I'm filing a complaint with command." "You do that every week. One day they'll listen. One day you'll enjoy something. That would be suspicious." At the end of the corridor, the hatch to the common bay slid open and 3 heads turned at once. Mara Sen, the Comet's chief engineer, was halfway inside an access panel with a plasma spanner in one hand and enough grease on her face to qualify as camouflage. Jun Ortega, medic and chronic collector of bad ideas, sat cross-legged on a cargo crate calibrating a bioscanner over a bowl of noodles. Terk Vale, navigation officer and unlicensed philosopher, leaned against the galley partition reading something projected into the air above his wrist. Mara saw Ilyas, then Sheelan, then the blood on both of them, then the weapons, then the ears. She slowly withdrew from the access panel. "No," she said. Ilyas pointed at her. "That is exactly what Bren said. I'm sensing a culture problem." Jun lowered the bioscanner. "Please tell me that's a rescued diplomat and not another battlefield decision." "She's Telari," said Terk, straightening. "Armed Telari, that feels important." "It's moderately important," Ilyas admitted. Sheelin inclined her head with solemn courtesy. I am Sheelin of the Telari Ninth Line. Your captain saved my life. I have therefore entered a chosen bond with him. Silence. Then Mara said, I need everyone to define at least 4 of those words before I decide whether to panic. Jun rose immediately. Chosen bond. Captain, did you get married in a crater? It was not a crater, said Ilyas. It was more of a collapsing ceremonial hazard. That is not better. Terk looked delighted. I knew it. This is how history starts, with 1 bad translation and 3 dead empires. It is not marriage, Sheelin said. Jun studied her expression. That sounded like the sort of sentence people say right before it absolutely becomes marriage. Ilyas scrubbed a hand over his face. Nobody is married. Mara folded her arms. All right. I'm going to ask this once, with the patience of a saint and the blood pressure of a bomb. Why is there a Telari warrior on my ship? Because, said Ilyas, I saved her. Her people have a very dramatic life debt custom. I objected to the ownership wording. We accidentally redefined sacred law, and now she's here voluntarily. Mara stared at him. Jun stared at him. Terk, to his everlasting discredit, smiled slowly and said, That is the most you thing you have ever done. Thank you, said Ilyas. It was not praise. Sheelin looked at the others. He speaks truth. That actually makes it worse, Mara muttered. Jun was already moving forward with the scanner. Sit, both of you. If anyone has redefined civilization, they can do it after I stop the leaking. Sheelin hesitated. Ilyas dropped onto the nearest bench. He outranks pain. I am the ship's physician, Jun said. You're a medic. I am the highest functioning approximation available. That's the spirit. Jun pointed the scanner at Sheelin. You too. She remained standing. Your medical device hums at an insulting frequency. That means it likes you. It does not sound like liking. Neither do I before caffeine. Sit. She looked to Ilyas. He lifted both hands. Your choice. That small phrase seemed to hit her harder than the battlefield had. Her ears stilled. Then, with visible care, she sat across from him. Jun's scanner swept over her wound and immediately began complaining in 2 languages. Wonderful. Internal bruising, residual charge burn. The diplomatic hold began at 3:10 ship time, which the reluctant comet marked by dimming the corridor lights, locking 2 outer hatches, and producing a system notice that read, Congratulations. You are now politically inconvenient. Mara stared at the notice for a long moment and said, I hate this ship. The ship answered through the overhead speaker. Your feelings have been logged and placed in the usual folder. There's a usual folder. There are several. Yours is large. Ilyas, standing at the galley counter with a ration pack he had already failed to open twice, sighed. I would like one crisis in my life that does not become sarcastic. Terk looked up from the table where he had spread out 3 overlapping hollow displays of Telari legal fragments, fleet mediation protocols, and 1 highly suspicious recipe for reactor-safe stew. That sounds anti-cultural. Jun, who was pretending not to watch Sheelin while very obviously watching Sheelin, set a steaming cup in front of Ilyas. Drink this before your personality starts molting. My personality is robust. Your personality is 90% sleep deprivation and bluff. Sheelin sat across from them, reading a translation stream projected over her wrist. She had spent the last hour going through human legal terminology, with the expression of someone encountering an especially hostile weather system. Her long ears kept shifting by tiny degrees each time a new concept appeared. At last she lowered the projection and said, You have 19 separate phrases for refusing responsibility while appearing cooperative. Terk brightened. That means the translator's working. It is not admirable. It's not meant to be, said Mara, climbing down from the maintenance ladder. It's governance. Sheelin regarded them all in silence for a moment, then said, Your species survives by turning failure into procedure. Jun pointed at her with great satisfaction. You see, she gets us. Ilya's finally forced the ration pack open and nearly launched protein strips across the galley. No one gets us. We barely get us. The ship chimed. Captain Venn, the synth voice said. A secure packet has arrived from Fleet Mediation Command, Telari Witness Archive, and 3 people whose signatures indicate they consider themselves extremely important. Only 3, said Ilya's quiet morning. Shall I summarize the packet? Mara folded her arms. Please let one of them have exploded. Regrettably, no. Summary, Fleet wants a formal statement. The Telari Archive disputes Captain Venn's reinterpretation of the witness right. However, 2 minority schools within Telari jurisprudence have submitted arguments suggesting the wording may support a voluntary reciprocal bond under pre-imperial grammar. The room went still. Terk slowly set down his cup. There are lawyers on her side, too. Sheelin lifted her chin. They are not lawyers, they are keepers of meaning. Ilyas chewed, swallowed, and said, that sounds like a lawyer who wears nicer robes. She almost smiled. Almost. Jun leaned on the table. So you accidentally stumbled into a centuries-old theological loophole. I prefer to think of it as respectful improvisation. Mara snorted. You said no one owns anyone and now civilizations are arguing over commas. Not commas, said Terk, eyes flicking over the hollow legal stream. Older than commas, this is much worse. These people are debating syntax with sacred consequences. Sheelan's ears dipped slightly. Among my people, syntax often has sacred consequences. Jun rubbed a hand over his face. That is exhausting. It prevents carelessness, she replied. It also prevents naps. Naps are not policy. Exactly the problem. The ship spoke again. Captain Venn. Fleet requests that Sheelan of the 9th Line remain visible during all mediated discussions to discourage escape, violence, or poetic declarations. Mara stared upward. Poetic declarations got their own category. After reviewing the battlefield transcript, yes. Ilyas closed his eyes briefly. I hate that this is my life. Terk pointed at him. You love that this is your life. You hate the paperwork. That is true, Ilyas admitted. The secure briefing began an hour later in the common bay because the actual briefing room still smelled faintly of ozone and an earlier electrical disagreement. A hollowing expanded over the central table, assembling 3 fleet officials, 2 Telari representatives, and 1 ancient-faced scholar, whose image arrived with enough encryption artifacts to suggest that meaning itself was traveling a long distance to be offended in person. Ilyas stood with his arms folded. Sheelan stood beside him by choice, not touching him, not behind him, simply there. Mara, Jun, and Terk remained in the bay under the extremely weak excuse of system support, which fooled nobody and satisfied everyone. A fleet mediator began. Captain Venn, for the official record, did Sheelan of the 9th Line declare herself your possession under recognized Telari witness right? Ilyas answered. She used words my translator rendered that way, yes. The mediator's mouth tightened. And did you accept? No. One of the Telari representatives, armored even in hologram, said, yet the bond persists. Ilyas glanced at Sheelan. Apparently. The armored envoy said, that is not a sufficient legal category. Terk muttered, not nearly quietly enough. It's a very romantic one, though. Mara elbowed him. The older Telari scholar turned toward Sheelan. His image flickered, but his eyes were sharp. Daughter of the 9th Line, did the human refuse you? The room altered around the question. Even Fleet seemed to understand that this was not semantics now. Sheelan answered without hesitation. He refused ownership. The scholar's gaze narrowed, but not the bond. No, why? She was silent for one beat, too. Then she said, because he treated my life as something I should continue to govern. No one spoke. The fleet mediator cleared his throat. For our purposes, that is emotionally compelling but structurally inconvenient. Jun whispered, that should be engraved on human civilization. The armored Telari envoy said, the daughter speaks from battlefield strain. Tradition is clear. The older scholar cut in, voice calm as drawn steel. Tradition is often clear to those who benefit from never examining it. That made everybody sit up straighter. Even Mara murmured, "Oh, I like him." The scholar continued, "The oldest root of the vow does not translate as ownership in the mercantile sense. It refers to being held within another's fate. Over centuries, military formalism hardened the phrase." The armored envoy snapped, "The military formalism preserves order." "It may also preserve laziness," said the scholar. Terk inhaled sharply, delighted. The fleet mediator pinched the bridge of her nose. "I need everyone to remember that several ceasefire corridors depend on this discussion becoming less philosophical." Ilya's raised a hand. "I can help." Every face in the hollow ring turned toward him with unified distrust. He said, "I didn't try to change her culture. I answered honestly from mine. She took that answer honestly from hers. If the result makes both systems uncomfortable, maybe that's because both systems were assuming too much." The mediator stared. "Captain, have you been rehearsing?" "No, this is what I sound like when cornered." Mara muttered, "Which is usually." The armored envoy looked at Sheelin again. "And if the human releases you from this chosen interpretation?" Sheelin's long ears went very still. "Then I remain what I was before, a woman who lived." It was simple, clean, devastating. The old scholar smiled then, very slightly. "There, do you hear it? That is the sound of a right surviving translation." The envoy said nothing. The fleet mediator exhaled. "Fine. Pending final review, Fleet will recognize the bond as a non-proprietary voluntary compact with no command authority and no transfer of personhood or labor rights." Jun blinked. "That is the least romantic sentence ever built." Terk nodded solemnly. "And yet history has just happened inside it." Mara looked at Ilya's. "Congratulations. You've invented diplomatic friendship with paperwork." "I deeply resent the paperwork part." The hollow ring dimmed, but before it vanished the old scholar addressed Sheelin one last time. "Daughter of the ninth line, do not mistake novelty for ease. If you keep this meaning, others will test it." Sheelin bowed her head once. "Then they will find it occupied." The scholar's image disappeared. For a while no one moved. Then the ship's synth voice said, "I have created a new internal folder, chosen bond. It is already untidy." Jun laughed so hard he nearly dropped his med scanner. The formal hold was not lifted, but it softened. They were still confined to ship, still watched, still politically inconvenient, but now there were forms to fill instead of armed Marines at the hatch. Human institutions relaxed the moment they could transform danger into documents. That evening, the comet drifted in maintenance orbit while Orthia turned below like an old scar under dim light. Sheelin stood in the observation corridor, reading a Telari message thread that grew more agitated by the minute. Ilya's came up beside her holding two cups. She glanced at one suspiciously. "What is that?" "Tea." "It smells defensive." "That means it's fresh." She accepted the cup anyway. "My people are arguing over me. Mine too. It's oddly flattering until minute 4. She stared out at the planet below. "Some call me dishonored, some call me brave. One called me linguistically contagious." Ilya's nearly choked on his tea. "That is extraordinary. I do not think it was praise. It absolutely was not, but I'm stealing it." She looked at him then, one brow lifting. "You make light of everything." "Not everything." He said it so quietly that she heard the difference at once. Her ears angled toward him. He leaned against the bulkhead. "Humor helps me carry the heavy parts without pretending they aren't heavy." She thought about that. "Among my people, dignity is how we carry weight. That works too. It is lonely." He turned his head. She continued, choosing each word carefully. "Dignity does not invite others to lift with you. It only asks them to admire the posture." The ship hummed around them. Far off, a maintenance tug flashed past like a metal insect crossing starlight. Ilya said, "That may be the best argument for bad jokes I've ever heard." "That was not a joke." "I know." She held his gaze for a moment longer, then looked back out at Orthia. When I spoke the vow on the battlefield, I believed my future had closed into one shape: necessary, honorable, finished. And now, her fingers tightened slightly around the cup. Now it is open. I do not yet know whether that is freedom or falling. He considered that seriously, then said, "Those two feelings overlap more than people admit." A soft laugh escaped her. He smiled. "There you are." She glanced at him. Do humans always wait beside uncertainty as if it were a difficult relative arriving by shuttle? Mostly. We offer it tea and complain privately. That seems ineffective. It is, but it passes the time. She lowered her gaze to the tea. "If I chose to leave this ship tomorrow, would you truly not feel betrayed?" He answered at once. No. Her ears stilled, absorbing it. Then he added, offended maybe, mildly dramatic. "I'd probably make a speech to the nearest wall, but not betrayed." That earned him a fuller laugh, warm and unguarded. He let the sound settle between them. After a while she said, "Then I will not leave tomorrow." "Good," he said. The wall was not prepared. Behind them the corridor speaker crackled. Mara's voice came through, already annoyed. "Captain, if you're done reshaping civilization by the viewport, I need you in engineering. The reactor has started making a noise that sounds legally threatening." Ilyas closed his eyes. "Of course it has." Sheelan looked toward the speaker. "Your ship calls constantly." "Yes, it's how it says it cares." He started down the corridor, then slowed when he realized she was walking beside him without waiting for permission, without asking for direction, simply choosing the same path. The simplicity of that struck him harder than any ceremony. At the engineering hatch, Mara looked up from a console, saw the two of them arrive together, and groaned. "I'm not dealing with whatever expression that is. One crisis at a time." Terk, sprawled half under a diagnostic panel, glanced out and smiled faintly. "Too late. They've become emotionally interoperable." Jun, from somewhere deeper in engineering, called out, "That sounds contagious. Should I quarantine anyone?" Sheelan's ears twitched. Ilyas caught it and said, very gravely, "Too late. She's already linguistically contagious." For half a second she stared at him. Then she laughed again, and even Mara lost the fight against smiling as the reactor growled. The ship shuddered, and the long work of choosing what the bond would mean continued. Not in ritual, not in command, but in the unhurried, difficult, strangely funny act of building something neither world had a proper word for yet. By the time the reluctant comet was cleared to leave maintenance orbit, 3 governments, 2 military councils, 1 Telari archive house, and Mara's coffee maker had all filed formal complaints. Mara read the compiled notice over breakfast and said, "I respect the coffee maker for knowing its place in history." "It does not know its place," said the ship's synth voice. "It has submitted an appeal." Jun nearly inhaled his tea. Terk, already awake in the deeply suspicious way of a man who had not actually slept, leaned over the galley table and said, "I think we're entering the stage of civilization where appliances gain legal standing out of spite." Ilyas took the notice pad, skimmed it, and groaned. "Fleet wants me present at the surface assembly." Sheelan looked up from the wrist display she had been reading. "So do the Telari delegates." "Wonderful. I always enjoy being summoned by people who would prefer I arrive already apologizing." Jun pointed his spoon at him. "You should apologize for that speech to the Maintenance Council. The Maintenance Council started it. You called a rear admiral emotionally decorative. He was being emotionally decorative." Mara pushed her cup away. "Focus. Surface assembly means this is bigger now. Not just witness law, not just fleet embarrassment. Bigger." Terk smiled faintly. "History continues to make poor choices around us." Sheelan's ears angled toward Ilyas. "You do not have to go." He looked at her. "Yes, I do." "Why?" He considered that, then set the notice pad down. "Because if I don't, other people will define what happened for us." She held his gaze for a long moment. "That answer would have been different when I met you." Jun raised a brow. "Are we witnessing growth?" Mara snorted. "Unpleasant but possible." Ilyas gave them all a tired look. I hate that you know me. False, said Terk. You find it structurally reassuring. The surface assembly was held in the Telari civic ring above the old Capitol Trench, a place rebuilt so many times that every corridor held its own argument with history. Human envoys occupied one side of the chamber in dark uniforms and carefully neutral expressions. Telari delegates occupied the other in layered ceremonial armor that somehow made neutrality look like a threat. Ilya stood in the center and wished, not for the first time, that diplomacy involved fewer floors and more convenient exits. Sheelan stood beside him, not behind, beside. The chamber noticed. So did the recorders floating overhead, little silver drones turning slowly, as they captured every shift of voice and posture for archives that would outlive all of them. A fleet mediator began with the exhausted tone of someone who had not wanted this assignment, and now feared it might become important. This assembly recognizes the matter of the Orthia witness right, and the subsequent declaration of voluntary reciprocal bond between Captain Ilya's Ven of the human fleet and Sheelan of the Telari Ninth Line. A Telari elder on the far tier said, the phrase remains unsound. A human legal officer replied, the phrase remains preferable to the alternatives. Another Telari voice, dry as cut metal, said, that is a human standard. Ilya's muttered, unfortunately, yes. The microphone nearest him picked it up and amplified it across the chamber. A few human officers looked down too quickly. One of them was clearly trying not to laugh. Sheelan's ear twitched. The elder turned to her. Sheelan of the Ninth Line, before witness and archive do you stand bound? She answered, I stand by choice. The elder's expression did not change. Choice is fragile. Sheelan's voice sharpened. So is obedience. It only pretends otherwise. That moved through the chamber like a current. A murmur rose from the upper tiers. Not outrage exactly. Recognition, resistance, interest, old structures making room for a dangerous sentence. The elder turned to Ilya's. Human, did you intend insult when you refused the right in its proper form? Ilya said, no. Did you intend reform? He almost laughed at that. No. Then what did you intend? He let the question settle. He had once survived by sidestepping gravity, by treating sincerity like a thing best handled with gloves and jokes and a fast exit. But the months since Orthia had done their work on him. Not by making him solemn. That would have worried everyone. By making him stay. Stay in the argument. Stay in the discomfort. Stay long enough for meaning to become work instead of performance. At last he said, I intended not to take a person's future away because she happened to survive. No one interrupted. He continued, quieter now. And after that I intended to keep telling the truth, even when it became inconvenient. Mara, watching remotely from the comet, would later say that this was the exact moment she became concerned he had been replaced by a better organized clone. A Telari archivist on the lower tier said, truth does not always preserve order. Ilya's nodded. No, but bad order destroys truth all the time. That one cost the chamber a full 6 seconds of silence. Then, unexpectedly, the elder gave a slight inclination of the head, not agreement, not surrender. Respect, perhaps, unwilling and therefore worth more. Another delegate rose, young, severe, the kind of severe that had probably been practicing since adolescence. If this interpretation stands, others may claim freedom from duty. Sheelan turned toward him. If duty fears freedom, then duty is weak. He stiffened. You speak rebellion. I speak responsibility, she said. I owed a life debt, I still do, but debt is not erased by choice. It is honored by it. The old scholar from the archive house appeared then by remote projection, flickering into the center tier like an inconvenient ghost. Finally, he said, someone in this chamber is using the language correctly. Terk, also watching remotely, was later said to have applauded in engineering until Mara threatened him with a wrench. The scholar lifted one hand. The issue before us is not whether tradition survives. It has survived war, migration, empire, revision, and military simplification. The issue is whether we are courageous enough to admit that survival is not the same as stagnation. A human officer murmured to another, "He really does sound like a lawyer in ceremonial robes." The scholar's head turned toward the sound with eerie precision. "And you sound like a clerk with poor hearing." That broke something in the room. Not authority, tension. A few humans laughed openly. One Telari envoy made a short choking noise and had to disguise it as a cough. Even the fleet mediator closed her eyes for a moment, as if accepting that dignity had left the proceedings and would not be returning. When the chamber settled again, the elder spoke. "Then let the record hold this. The Orthia Declaration shall remain valid under amended reading. No person may be claimed as property by witness right. The bond, where recognized, shall stand as mutual and revocable by will, binding only in honor freely given." The recorder drones pulsed blue. Archive accepted. Fleet recognized. Legal framework updated. Just like that, centuries bent. Not shattered. Bent. Ilias exhaled a breath he had not realized he was holding. Sheelin did not move for a moment. Then her shoulders loosened by one almost invisible degree. Her ears lifted, not in triumph but in something steadier. Relief, maybe, or room to breathe. The assembly dissolved into side conversations, secondary motions, and the frantic administrative feeding habits of institutions presented with new language. Humans began requesting clarifications. Telari delegates began arguing over applications. Somewhere behind them, two archivists were already disagreeing about footnotes. Ilias leaned slightly toward Sheelin and said under his breath, "Well, we appear to have committed cultural revision." She looked at him. "You say that as if it were an accidental spill. It often feels that way." For the first time since entering the chamber, she smiled without restraint. "You are impossible. I'm told that frequently by experts." They left the civic ring hours later into the blue-white light of late Orthia afternoon, the trench winds carrying the sound of reconstruction crews and transit rails. Above them, ships crossed the sky in careful lanes now that the war was over and everybody had returned to the more respectable violence of negotiation. At the transport platform, Sheelin stopped walking. Ilias stopped too. Around them, delegates moved past in clusters. Guards spoke into wrist comms. Cargo lifters hummed overhead. The world did not pause for private moments. It simply made people have them anyway. Sheelin said, "When I first followed you, I thought I was stepping into obligation." He waited, she went on. "Then I thought I was stepping into uncertainty. I disliked that more." "That sounds right." Her mouth shifted, almost a laugh. "Now," she said, "I think I was stepping into authorship." The word struck him cleanly. He had changed too. He knew that now, not because he had become noble. Jun would have filed a medical complaint if that happened. He had changed because somewhere between the battlefield and the assembly, he had stopped treating care as something to dodge with cleverness. He still joked. He probably always would. But he no longer used humor to escape meaning. He used it to carry meaning farther. "That," he said, "is a terrifyingly good sentence. I learned from exposure. Linguistically contagious after all." This time her laugh came easily. A shuttle descended toward the platform, engines whispering. Telari markings along the hull. "My people want me to return with the delegation," she said. He nodded once. "I assumed. They want to question me, consult me, possibly place me in 6 ceremonial disputes and at least 1 educational archive." "That sounds exhausting." "It does." He looked at the shuttle, then back at her. "Are you going?" "Yes." The answer hit harder than he expected, though he had promised himself it would not. She saw that. Then she added, "For a while." Something in his chest eased and embarrassed him simultaneously. That's a manipulative pause, and I respect it. Her ears tipped forward. "I am learning from humans too. Then I'm sorry in advance." She stepped closer, close enough that the noise of the platform seemed to move around them. "I do not belong to you," she said. He met her eyes. "No, you do not belong to me. Definitely no, I'm barely housebroken. And yet," she said, "I choose this bond." He smiled, softer than usual. "So do I." She lifted a hand then, not in oath, not in ceremony, just a hand. He looked at it, then took it. No witnesses demanded form, no archive required phrasing, no ancient law leaned over their shoulders. Only choice, plain and difficult and enough. When she released him, she said, "I will come back to the comet." "Good," he said. The ship has become emotionally attached. From his calm, as if summoned by slander, Mara's voice crackled. "The ship is not the only one, Captain. Also, if you miss departure slot 9, I am leaving without both of you on principle." Jun's voice came right after. "That's not true. She'd only leave without him." Terk added, "I've already written the opening line of the historical account. It begins, 'Through administrative distress they persevered.'" Ilias groaned. "I need better friends." "You need quieter ones," Sheelan corrected. "That too." The Telari shuttle opened its boarding ramp. Sheelan stepped back once, then paused. "When we met, I thought saving a life created a chain. And now,